Imagine waking up in the middle of summer and the meat you bought yesterday is already crawling with the smell of decay. Imagine watching milk curdle within hours, watching vegetables wilt before you even had a chance to cook them, watching an entire week's food supply spoil overnight because of nothing more than a change in temperature. Now imagine that this wasn't a nightmare. This was Tuesday. For more than 99% of human history, there was no cold, no mechanical chill humming quietly in a kitchen corner, no safety net, just heat, decay, and the constant quiet terror of not knowing whether tonight's dinner might make your children sick. How did entire civilizations survive an enemy that was invisible, silent, and always working against them? How did people build empires, raise families, and feed armies with the one thing we now consider absolutely non-negotiable? That question haunted me for weeks. My name is Adrian Vale, and I've spent years digging through the parts of history nobody bothers to document, the everyday battles nobody wrote poems about. And the deeper I went into this one, the more I realized something uncomfortable. We didn't just invent refrigeration to make life convenient, we invented it because humanity was quite literally at war with time itself. And tonight, I want to take you into that war. To understand the scale of the problem, you have to strip away everything modern. No electricity, no steel compressors, no plastic seals, just human ingenuity pressed against a merciless biological clock. Bacteria don't care about your harvest, your hunger, or your hard work. Warmth is their invitation, and for most of history, warmth was everywhere.
So the first humans who figured out that cold could slow this process weren't scientists. They were survivors, watching nature and stealing its secrets. Archaeological evidence takes us back over 3,000 years to Persian engineers who built extraordinary structures called yakhchāls, towering, dome-shaped buildings made from a special heat-resistant mortar. These weren't just huts. Some rose over 60 feet into the desert sky, using wind-catching towers and underground channels to trap and preserve ice through scorching heat. Ice in a desert. Long before anyone understood thermodynamics, these builders were manipulating airflow and evaporation to defy the sun itself. When I first read about the yakhchāl, I remember thinking, this wasn't primitive technology. This was genius disguised as simplicity. But not every civilization had deserts and clever architecture. Most of the ancient world relied on something far more universal and far more brutal in its demands: ice harvesting. In the freezing winters of northern Europe, China, and later colonial America, entire communities would cut massive blocks of ice from frozen lakes and rivers. Picture this: men balancing on frozen water with iron saws, hauling ice blocks the size of coffins, racing against the arrival of spring. This ice would then be packed into underground pits, layered with straw or sawdust as insulation, sealed away like treasure. And in many cases, it was treasure. Because if the harvest failed or the storage pit leaked warmth, communities could lose their entire preservation supply for the year. Here's the detail that still gets me. This ice wasn't just for the wealthy sipping cool drink. Companies literally shipped frozen lake water across oceans, insulated in sawdust-packed ships, sailing all the way to the Caribbean and even India, losing much of the cargo to melting along the way, yet still turning enormous profits. Frederick Tudor, a Boston businessman nicknamed the Ice King, built an empire on something that, quite literally, disappeared in his hands. Think about that. An entire fortune built on selling something that vanished before your eyes. But ice was a luxury reserved mostly for cities, coastlines, and cold climates. For most of the world's population, the farmers, the villagers, the people scattered across warm regions with no lakes to harvest, refrigeration wasn't an option at all. So how did they survive? The answer is one of the most overlooked chapters of human ingenuity: preservation as a way of life, not a convenience. Salt became sacred. Meat was packed in it, buried in barrels, dried into leather-hard strips that could survive months without spoiling. Fish were smoked over open fires for days, not just for flavor, but because smoke created a protective barrier against bacteria. Vegetables were fermented in clay pots, an accidental discovery that created some of the most enduring foods in human history. Foods like sauerkraut, kimchi, and pickled vegetables, all born not from culinary creativity, but from desperation to avoid starvation. And here's something that still stuns me every time I think about it: fermentation, Something modern wellness culture treats as a trendy health choice was actually one of humanity's oldest survival technologies. It wasn't a lifestyle, it was a lifeline. Milk posed its own nightmare. Unlike meat or vegetables, milk spoiled within hours in warm climates, sometimes minutes in extreme heat.
So humans transformed it before it could betray them, turning it into cheese, yogurt, butter, and clarified fats like ghee, all designed to extend its life far beyond its natural expiration. Entire cultural identities were built around these transformations. Ever wonder why certain cheeses are aged in caves? It's not just tradition. Caves offered something rare and priceless before refrigeration: consistent, cool temperature. And this is where the story gets darker, because preservation wasn't always enough. Spoiled food was a constant companion of pre-modern life, and food poisoning killed silently, relentlessly, and often without anyone understanding why. Physicians blamed bad air, evil spirits, imbalanced bodily humors, anything except the invisible bacteria multiplying in warm meat. Entire households could be wiped out from something as simple as improperly stored fish. Children were especially vulnerable. Historians estimate that spoiled food contributed significantly to infant mortality rates that we would now consider almost unimaginable. There's one detail that haunted me during my research. Medieval cooks developed an entire vocabulary of spices, not primarily for flavor, as popular myth suggests, but to mask the smell and taste of meat that was already beginning to turn. Pepper, cloves, nutmeg, luxuries so valuable they were used as currency, were partly a desperate disguise against decay. The romantic image of medieval feasts hides an uncomfortable truth. Sometimes the extravagant taste was covering up spoilage that today would send us straight to the emergency room. Root cellars became essential architecture, dug deep into the earth where temperatures remained naturally stable. Spring houses were built directly over flowing streams, using the cool, moving water to chill milk and butter. In India, clay pots called matkas used evaporative cooling, water seeping slowly through porous clay, cooling the contents inside through simple, elegant physics. In parts of Africa, similar evaporative coolers using sand and wet cloth kept vegetables fresh for days in blistering heat. They simply understood the world through observation, trial, and the harsh consequence of failure. And then, in the 19th century, everything began to change. As industrialization accelerated, scientists began experimenting with mechanical refrigeration, using chemical reactions to artificially create cold, rather than relying on nature's leftovers. It sounds almost mundane now, but at the time,
100 years, compared to hundreds of thousands of years of human existence, fighting an invisible war against spoilage, disease, and starvation. We are, historically speaking, the first generation in the entire story of our species that has never had to fear our own food. I find that thought almost impossible to sit with. Somewhere, a Persian engineer designed a desert tower to trap winter air. Somewhere, a fisherman spent 3 days smoking his catch over a slow fire, praying it would last the season. Somewhere, a mother packed vegetables into salt because she had no other choice, knowing that failure meant hunger for her children. And all of that effort, spanning millennia, quietly disappeared the moment we plugged in a machine and forgot to ask how remarkable that convenience truly is. If forgotten history like this fascinates you the way it fascinates me, there's another journey waiting, one about how something as simple as clean water once separated life from death for entire civilizations, and how humanity fought its way toward the modern world one impossible problem at a time. Subscribe and walk with me through the parts of history that shaped everything we now take for granted. Because the next time you open your refrigerator door and cool air brushes against your face, remember this: you are standing at the finish line of one of the longest, quietest wars in human history. And for the first time in the story of our species, we won.